I want to turn now to a really tragic event we saw last month, and that was the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And in recent years, we have just seen horrific moments of political violence, from the shooting of Steve Scalise to the arson attack on Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's residence, the assassination attempt on President Trump, the assassination of Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman, to now this assassination of Charlie Kirk. What do voters make of this political violence?
Well, the data we collected is fascinating. And again, for our viewers, I'm going to go slow through this data because it highlights the political moment that we're all living in and how polarized it is, but also to some extent the normalization of political violence that we're going through. And this is a problem, whether you're Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, because no society can survive very long with this kind of tension brewing within. So here's the data, and again, some of it is common sense, and some of it is quite shocking. 75% of voters today that believe that the rhetoric of our politicians have become too extreme, and that includes 83% of Democrats, 79% of independents, and even two-thirds of Republicans, 65% of Republicans. Even with regards to President Trump, 58% say that he's too extreme and they want him to tone it down. Close to 7 in 10, or a little bit over 7 in 10 of Republicans see his rhetoric as appropriate, but it doesn't really sit very well with coveted independents, where 64% basically say that he's too extreme, and even Democrats, of course, you would expect them to say it. When we dig deeper into this and we ask Democrats, do you think the rhetoric of Democratic politicians is too extreme or appropriate? Here, an interesting picture emerges. 33% actually believe that the rhetoric of Democrats themselves is too extreme. Only 67% of Democrats believe that their rhetoric is appropriate. And also 62% of independents believe that the rhetoric of Democratic leaders is too extreme. We asked the same questions of Republicans and independents and even Democrats, actually. Do you think that the rhetoric of leading Republican politicians is too extreme or appropriate? And again, 27% of Republicans themselves say that the rhetoric of Republican politicians is too extreme. And the 64% similar number of independents say that the rhetoric of Republican politicians is too extreme. So roughly 3 out of 10 members of each party believe that the rhetoric of their own politicians is too extreme. That should give everyone pause. And this also shows that about a third of each of the party believe that the parties are too much into the extreme. And the parties have to take note that about a third of their base, this makes up the common sense majority. And if you take a third of Republicans and a third of Democrats and 40% of Americans who are independents, the largest bloc within American politics today is, call it the common sense majority. These are voters who want reason in their politics and fights around issues, not extreme rhetoric that leads to political violence. And at some point, these voters will coalesce, or they will snap against each of the parties themselves, because the pressure is just too much. When we ask in the poll, do you think that today's political rhetoric is a cause of violence or is not responsible for political violence, 72%, over 7 in 10 voters say that it's leading to violence. And that includes 80% of Democrats, 61% of Republicans, and 76% of independents. And there are also bad news for social media companies. Still, we asked, do you think that social media is helping discourage political violence? It's encouraging it, or is not having any effect on it? And by a ratio of over 4x, people believe that it's encouraging political violence. 64% say it's encouraging political violence, 15% say it's discouraging it, and about 20% say no effect. But what's remarkable about these numbers is the consistency across the political spectrum. 63% of Democrats, 66% of Republicans, 64% of independents, others all say that social media is encouraging political violence. And again, this is a warning signal and a red flag for social media companies and the need to do more to create better conversations within the platforms while still preserving free speech. I'll add in a positive data point here, not to make it too somber for our viewers, but when we ask the question, do you think that America is hopelessly divided, or could it come together with leadership that tried harder to bring the country together? 56% say that it can come together with better leadership. And again, there's unanimous agreement across the political spectrum. 54% of Democrats, 60% of Republicans, and 56% of independents basically say that the country can come together with better political leadership. And so the data is very striking. I'll add to it that we even asked where recent political assassinations, like the assassination of Charlie Kirk, or United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, or Minnesota Democratic State Representative Melissa Hortman, justified or not justified. And while for a majority of the country, let's say roughly around 8 in 10 respondents, it was not justified, and they believe that this type of political violence should never be justified as factions and political parties pursue their ends. For about 2 in 10, they say justified. And that's striking. Again, no society can survive that level of, let's call it the normalization of political violence, or the desensitization vis-a-vis political violence. So there's a lot of work to be done by both parties, given this information. And we even asked, some of the recent assassination attempts around President Trump, around Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, around Governor Shapiro, around former Speaker Pelosi, who had her home invaded. And again, it's similar figures, this 80-20 breakdown, where 20% say, yeah, it was justified. That's scary because it affects everyone across the political spectrum, regardless of who you are. And it's incumbent upon all of the leaders and both of the parties and beyond to tone things down and to make sure that this type of political violence doesn't become normalized and voters don't become desensitized towards it. So again, striking figures, and obviously I'm sure you have many reactions to what I've just worked through in the data.
Certainly a lot of warning signs in those numbers there. I'm curious about who you described as the common sense voters, those voters who think that even people in their own party are too extreme, on the right, on the left, independents. I mean, at what point what happens to them if they think that the boiling point is just too high? Would they flip parties? Would they stay at home? What does voting look like for that group?
You said it exactly right. I mean, I think that this is potentially a return to swing voter politics, and frankly, it will be good for the country because for the last 25 years, we've had campaign after campaign after campaign that focuses on base voters rather than swing voters. And swing voters, these are issues voters. These are voters that are less about the red meat. They are a lot more about coming together and reaching, sensible conclusions, and forcing the two parties to compromise, right? But we forget that politics, at the end of the day, is the art of the deal, is the art of compromise, and none of the parties quite are doing that, as we see in this government shutdown. So potentially there's a silver lining within all of this data. But again, from what we see right now, the current snapshot, some very, very striking figures, which are frankly very concerning as well.